As any self-respecting Red knows, the biggest games of the season are irrespective of league position. So when United pulled out a home draw against the Scousers in the FA Cup third round last week, most will have seen it as a reason to celebrate. This season has seen differing fortunes for both clubs, with Liverpool spending most of the season surprisingly in the bottom half of the table, whilst United have rarely been out of the top three. With the rise of noisy neighbours City on the back of oil money, the Manchester derby is potentially equalling the games against Liverpool for passion on and off the field. However, when one looks in terms of honours, the two biggest teams in England are clearly United and Liverpool. United Fans TV spoke to football writer and United We Stand editor Andy Mitten and Farm front man and Liverpool season ticket holder Peter Hooton about a very special rivalry.
I have to respect Liverpool Football Club because they're the second biggest club in Britain, one of the biggest clubs in the world, second behind Manchester United, I might add. I'm a United fan. I don't like Liverpool. When I go to Old Trafford or to Anfield to watch matches, I'll be singing all the songs against the Scousers like anyone. I love that edge, I love that rivalry. I'd hate to see that sanitised. But I respect them. Don't like them, but I respect them. Because they've won five European Cups, fluked a couple, and because they've won 18 league championships. And when I was growing up, Liverpool was so dominant. I never thought that United would even win the league, let alone catch up with their once insurmountable total. But that's happened. Here we are in 2010. We've won 18, looked far more likely to win a 19th before Liverpool.
First trip to Old Trafford was actually a birthday present off my dad. He thought it'd be a good idea to take me to Old Trafford for my birthday, which, you know, I thought it was a good idea. And it wasn't until we got there that we realised, you know, that we'd come into the Lions' Den. And, you know, it was the first time I'd actually experienced, you know, the hatred between the clubs. I mean, up until then, I'd realised that, you know, Liverpool, United, big rivals, of course, but it wasn't until that game when I saw the actual intense feeling that the fixture generates.
I think you'll find a lot of sensible Mancunians and Liverpoolians. They will say that we are so alike that we daren't admit it. I think Manchester's a better city than Liverpool. Say that now on the record, because it is. It's bigger. It's come out of the post-industrial decline far better than Liverpool. There's more to do in Manchester. But I think Liverpool's a good city as well. Yeah, I know people. My dad will never go to Liverpool. He hates Liverpool. When I go there and tell him I've had a decent day there, he's absolutely appalled with me. What are you going there for? And so I've got friends there, and friends I like, friends I respect. The rivalry goes beyond the football. It's a social rivalry. It's an economic rivalry. You can trace it back centuries. The Manchester Ship Canal was built. It's behind me now. It was built because Liverpool, the port of Liverpool, was charging too much in taxes. So the Mancunian bigwigs in business decided to circumnavigate that literally by building a big ditch 40 miles from the sea, which at one point made Manchester the third biggest port in Britain.
If you look to Manchester, you look at you know, it was based on a different industrial revolution, the heart of the industrial revolution, of course, but very strict in terms of like the way the mills operated, in terms of the way, you know, Manchester was unique in terms of the trades union movement, getting trade unions organised, whereas Liverpool, you looked at the Liverpool docks and the employment on the docks, and it was probably a trade union's graveyard in many respects, because I remember an old Stalinist, member of the Communist Party who came in here in the 30s, said to me once, when you were posted to Liverpool and you had to recruit the dockers into the Communist Party, it was like going to the elephant's graveyard, because they just wouldn't be disciplined like that. Both cities very close to each other, 30 odd miles away, but they have got a lot in common, there's no doubt about that, but there's also massive differences as well. I think Liverpool was built upon that, on the docks, and you can't get away from that. Liverpool people look to the sea and they look to the port, and a lot of industry and employment in Liverpool was based upon casual labour, and that casual labour philosophy and also seafaring philosophy was, when you get money, you spend it.
I have a degree of sympathy with Liverpool when it comes to their ownership. I think the fans have been shafted. Gillette and Hicks have come in, promised things they haven't delivered, like a new stadium, and I don't celebrate that. I have sympathy for them. I hope that United beat them every time we play them, but I wouldn't like to see Liverpool Football Club go under, because I think the rivalry is brilliant, and it's a genuine rivalry as well. It's built on both teams having consistently big fan bases, consistent record of trophies, worldwide followings. They're not a team who've come along and received an injection of cash from a Russian oligarch or from the Middle East. Liverpool have been around and successful for a long time.
I mean, Manchester City, they might be the new kids on the block with the money, but really, in terms of history, you know, I remember the 70s teams of City, Summerby and Marsh and all them, you know, and they were good to watch, but there's never been that intense rivalry. Even Liverpool fans going to Manchester in those days, it wasn't the same as going to Man United, because Man United was an institution that Busby built up. Liverpool was an institution that Shankly built up. They're almost mirror images of themselves.
I really liked a couple of years ago Xavi Alonso, but I'd say Steven Gerrard. I've been fortunate or unfortunate, depending how you see it, enough to interview him several times. And I spent a day with him a couple of years ago, and I liked him. I thought he was a good lad. He was a football lad, and he was taking the mickey out of me because I'm from Manchester and I'm a United fan. I like that. I don't like boring footballers. I like the fact he was having a go at me, and I was having a go back at him. I think he's a great player. He took the decision not to win league titles and stayed at Anfield. I know Sir Alex Ferguson would have loved him at Old Trafford, but he couldn't move from Liverpool to United. He just couldn't. His family would get so much stick. It's not just about him. When he tried to move to Chelsea, he was leaned on pretty heavily, and I don't envy him. But I think Gerrard, I think he's a world-class player.
Yeah, you see, George Best, if you're a football fan, you love George Best. It's as simple as that. And the very fact that he played for Man United, that's got nothing to do with it, really. When we were brought up playing football in the park in the 60s, you know, George Best wasn't, because he played for Man United, wasn't despised, or Alan Ball, because he plays for Everton. Everton at the time wasn't despised. It was more of a, you know, these are great footballers. And to me, George Best, you know, he epitomised, you know, what was great about a footballer and a natural talent. You couldn't coach what George Best had. The same way as you look at Rooney now, in a way, you can't coach. You know, I know so many Everton coaches, and they said when he comes to Everton's training ground, you just see he was uncoachable. He had natural ability, natural talent, and that's what George Best had. And I think, you know, for our generation who grew up with that team, there isn't that dislike of George Best. You might hear the odd song which is meant to upset people, but I think for our generation, there's the utmost respect for George Best as a player, and that's why we wanted him in the Farm video. And I think if you look at the great music that's come out of Manchester, there has been a sort of like isolationist desolation to it. You know, if you look at Joy Division, you think of disused factories and the Industrial Revolution. You come to Liverpool and it was Echo and the Bunnymen beside waterfalls, and a very romantic view. And I think that's reflected a lot of the time in the music. I think Liverpool musicians, because there might be hardship in the city, especially in the 1980s, looked towards whimsical songs about, flowery events, whereas Joy Division and groups like that were very desolate. And I think that's reflected, I think, in the artwork of the different cities. And if you go to the Stone Roses, by the time the Stone Roses come along, they were more adopting more of a Liverpool stance. They were getting photographed on mountains. They didn't want to be photographed on railway sidings anymore, you know. And so there has been a development and obviously a change. Very similar cities, music-wise, pretty different, I think. And that stems from probably also the legacy of the Beatles. Even in the 80s, there was groups who were reminiscent of the 60s sound, whereas Manchester groups were, like the Happy Mondays, were experimenting in New Order, they were experimenting with technology. So very, very different in terms of music.
And there's a rivalry in music as well. They had a band, I think they're called the Beatles, something like that. And they've had a lot of other decent bands. I loved the Lars in the early 90s, I like Cast. Echo and the Bunnymen. But Manchester's had even more successful groups. Maybe none have been as commercially big as the Beatles have been, but I think both cities punch well above their weight in terms of their demographics and the influence they have around the world. If you look at similar sized cities to Manchester or to Liverpool, they're virtually anonymous, whereas everybody knows Manchester and Liverpool all around the world, primarily for football, but also for music. And I think both cities can be proud of that. They're both very creative cities, and I'm never fully sure why that is. Maybe because the weather's so bad. People are locked up in the bedrooms, practicing on musical instruments. Because they're not rich cities, they're predominantly working class cities. Kids are playing football. Kids love football. Both huge football cities. And when a footballing event happens, it sweeps through the city. And you don't get that in London, you don't get it in Birmingham, you get it in Manchester, you get it in Liverpool, and to a lesser extent in Newcastle and Glasgow as well.
They were the two love of my life, you know, football and music. And I mean, I must say, it was, first of all, it was football, you know. That's what I used to play morning, noon and night. That's all I ever did, you know. I mean, I was always into music, but not as a big music fan. It's only when you get later on, maybe into your teens, that you start discovering music. And the groups that, you know, I was into music during the 70s, but it was all like, I was dilly and dally, and it wasn't until groups like The Clash and The Jam came along that I really took a big interest in music, you know. So then music started shaping my life, but I didn't abandon football. A lot of people, you know, people in groups, you know, you couldn't talk about football in the 1980s. It just wasn't fashionable. It was the public enemy. In terms of football, obviously the rivalry is Liverpool-Man United. There is no rivalry with Manchester City, you know. So you can say there's a big city rivalry, of course there is, but really we haven't got a rivalry with Manchester City, and they're from Manchester, so it's the rivalry is between the two biggest clubs in the UK, and I think that's Liverpool and Man United.